And Mr. Rowe, after you were freed from the prison system, how was your life rehabilitating into society? How was your life like in society after you were released?
Yeah, and I think that's something that people tend to think is the euphoria, right? You think conviction quashed, I walk out. I went in when I was 20. I came out when I was 32 years old. So I missed every day of my 20s confined to a prison cell where I was held on my own. I was not in a cell with anybody else. I didn't have a television. I didn't have a toilet for, I say, 11 of those 12 years. I used to pee and poo in a potty. I didn't have a handle on the inside of my door. I didn't have the ability to make decisions for myself for 12 years. When I wanted to have a pee and a poo, it was in a potty that was under my bed, that was bolted to the floor in a room that was 6 by 9 with bars that were crisscrossed, and I could hardly get any light in there for all of those years. And when I did pee and poo in my potty and it was full up, I had to wait until a prison officer opened the door and allowed me to go and empty it in a urine where everybody else was emptying theirs. And that inhumane treatment shaped the person that I become when my conviction was overturned and I was released. So you asked the question, what was it like when I got out? Yes, in the first 24, 48 hours, there was popping of champagne and there were celebrations. But then everybody in my life, including my sisters and my family, had to get on with bringing up their kids and working and earning money. And I found myself on my own, as you would. And the excitement and the euphoria disappears. And then you've got to get on with life. And what that meant for me and what it means for people, whether they are guilty or not guilty, coming out of prison after a long time, is you lose the ability to do things that you have grown up to do naturally. And here's an example. I'd lost the ability because of my wrongful imprisonment and the years that I spent in a cell where there was no handle on the inside of a door. I'd lost the ability to open a door for myself for a short period after I got out of prison, because I would walk up to a door and I'd stop and wait for someone to open it for me, even though there was a handle on the inside this time because I was free and I could reach for that handle and I could open that door for myself. But I'd lost the instinct to do that because every time I walked through a door in a prison, it was opened and closed for me. So the conditioning that you go through during the years that you are held in prison can affect your ability to do things naturally in the open, free world. And I would just stress that, you've got to multiply that by a number of other things. I couldn't sleep in a bed with a partner because I'd been sleeping in a single bed by myself for 12 years. And I know people do that naturally, but when you're in prison, you cuddle the wall, right? You find comfort in the stone cold wall that is next to your cell bed. All of a sudden, you find yourself out in the wide world, and there is an abundance of opportunity to sleep with other people, but it was uncomfortable, and I couldn't do that. And so I'm just trying to stress that for people who go to prison, who are treated inhumanely, who are treated like animals and deprived of things that they should be entitled to, even though they're in prison, or just a simple being in prison, rightfully or wrongly, but rightfully, there are consequences to the psychological, physical existence of a person when they're released. And those are just some of the examples of the challenges that I faced, whilst I was in prison and came out of prison.
Yeah, some psychological cues, some psychological patterns, they stay with us, right? Especially after 12 years, right, Mr. Rowe?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you can think about that in any world, whether it's in the military, and I suppose the same applies to people who are working for an institution, right? You leave that job and you've learned a skill, and now you've got to acquire new skills to do a new job if you've been made redundant or something. It's like what you and I do in terms of interviewing people. There is a skill to getting the best out of people where you listen to what they have to say and you listen to their story rather than it being about you. There is a skill in everything that we do, and relearning abilities, but there is a positive, right? And that's why I said at the beginning of this, my traumas I've turned into the positives. All of that experience has made me the person that I am today in terms of my values, my morals, my compass, my dogged approach, my compassion. All of my experiences have been put to good use.
And Mr. Rowe, how was the process of pursuing a degree in journalism inside prison, in jail? How was that process? And like, how did you bring that when you were released? How did you bring that that degree to use with the BBC and everything? How was your trajectory in journalism?
Well, I should say this, I didn't get a degree in journalism. So the process was this: whilst I was in prison, whilst I mentioned earlier on that what was important for me was to change the narrative of the story that was being told about who I was, and the crimes that I didn't commit. So I was able to approach through the education department within the British prison system an opportunity whereby a university college in the UK would provide me with booklets where there were courses on how to study to become a journalist. And I received these booklets in my prison cell, and I would read those booklets, and I would do what anybody would do in college. I would embark on as much as I could, answering those questions and developing my understanding of what journalism is all about. And then I would maybe go and try and interview somebody to learn about how to write up that interview. And then I would send that to the college on the outside, and they would mark it and they would send it back in. It was that very slow, snail process. Digital technology did not exist in prison. Mobile phones didn't exist in prison. So it was always done by the power of the pen and ink and good old postage. You post it and it go in and it come back. And I never got to finish that course because I was such a bad person in prison. I was so volatile and violent in my behavior that I was often, and because of my security status, I was considered a high-risk prisoner. So I was often moved from one establishment and to another establishment, or I'd be moved out of my cell to another cell, and all my papers and things would be left behind. So I never really actually got to finish the journalism course, although I did learn a lot. And from the confines of my prison cell, I did write to newspapers who published my letters where I questioned not just my wrongful conviction, but issues to do with the law, whether it was disclosure of evidence and legalities. And when I came out of prison, I had no desire, and this is honest, I had no desire to become a journalist. I did it purely to manipulate the journalist to tell proper stories and true stories about myself. But I found myself in an opportunity that I couldn't turn down, where somebody who was aware of the high profileness of my case, who I met at the BBC, who offered me a job. I didn't apply for the job. I didn't submit an application. I didn't do any interviews. I just met somebody who liked me, liked what I had to say, but recognized that I had a skill that the academic journalists didn't have, right? Because the academic journalists go to university and they learn how to become a journalist from the books. They may get a little bit of experience, more so today than in the past. I had the ability to talk to people, to interact with people. I had the skills of investigating because I had to investigate my own case. And I was a meticulous, and this is really important, I was a meticulous researcher. So it meant researching my own case in prison for 12 years was a good skill to have to research something on the outside, whether it was an injustice or it was a story. I just had that skill. And the other thing was, what I was doing complemented the academic journey. So I would describe myself as a street journalist. I learned my trade on the street. I'd climb over the wall and get the evidence where they'd knock on the door and go through the door. So there was a difference in our skills, right? I could deal with criminals because I lived in that world. I could deal with politicians because I competed with that world, and so my academic colleague had the skills that they acquired and I had my skills. So we complemented each other. And that just helped my career. Whether I was to become a radio journalist, which I started out as, whether it was in front of the camera, whether it was writing the script. But it all came down to, I think, the final thing, which was about integrity and honesty, and about, presenting something that was as honest as I could possibly make it. And that's how I developed my career as a journalist at the very beginning.